Salutations, good morning, shalom, all that. I'm broadcasting to you live from my kitchen. Well, now that I think about it, it won't be live, it'll be pre-recorded. Anyway, forget that. Today, I want to talk about ritual. It's a weird topic, I know, but it jumped out to me lately, and I wanted to say something about it. So, ritual. What is ritual? Ritual I would define as the embodied manifestation of some sort of tradition. As a matter of fact, I think that rituals are the primary way in which we continue traditions. And there are secular and religious rituals. And I think the value of rituals is understated today, especially because we sort of have a cultural zeitgeist that is fundamentally anti-ritualistic. The best example I can give of this is the fact that it's not very common anymore for people to have weddings. It's much more common for them to go to the courthouse and sign a marriage license. And of course, there are reasons for this. People cite costs and things of that nature. And I guess having a potluck wedding would be embarrassing, but it can be done. But regardless, there is, in this cultural moment, sort of a rejection of ritual as being something that is anti-intellectual, anti-enlightened. There's no reason to have a wedding. It's much more efficient to go to the courthouse. There's no reason to sit at the table and eat dinner. It's more efficient to sit at the couch and watch television while you eat. And when people defend rituals, usually certain psychologist types, they'll defend it from the grounds of, well, actually, if you do these rituals, it'll have some kind of psychological good for you. Where I'm coming from as a traditionalist is that rituals are, at least I think, probably 50% of how one generation transfers the traditions that they have been taught to the next generation, with the other 50 being different forms of education. And the reason for this, or the reason I think ritual is so important, it stems from a right understanding of the human being. The reason I think the sort of the kingmakers in the cultural frame that we're in right now are anti-ritualistic is because they don't understand the importance of the body. So I think a lot of modern people, think of the body as either a form of locomotion for the head, that the real person is in here, and that the rest of this is just sort of a shell that helps it walk around. Or this can even be taken in a Gnostic direction. Say the real you is some sort of ephemeral cloud that floats around, and it's just sort of attached to the body. But I think if you want to understand the human being rightly, then you have to talk about how, from the Christian perspective, the human soul is united and joined perfectly with their own corporal nature. So we're not souls with bodies, but we're also not bodies with souls. We are a perfect union of these two things, just as you would later expound upon. Christ is a perfect union of the natures of God and man. And so it's the same sort of concept with humans. What this means is that having embodied experiences is intensely important for human beings. And you can see this throughout history. And not just embodied in the sense of it's occurring in the real world, but embodied in the sense of you are physically doing something. So there are several secular examples of rituals that you do that can teach meaning, which is, part and parcel of teaching tradition. A good example is, I'm going to go back to the wedding example. The father of the bride walks the bride down the aisle and hands her off to the groom. Weddings are nowadays steeped in sort of a religious undercurrent, but there were weddings before Christianity. Other cultures have weddings, and this whole father passing the bride off thing is not necessarily unique. But that's not the point. The point is why. What is it? What is it communicating? What is it doing? Well, what it's doing is, in the presence of all these people, as the father is handing the bride off to the groom, it is an embodied statement of the father transferring his responsibilities as the custodian of his daughter over to her husband. So there's a lot of complex meaning that can be communicated just by that simple act of the father walking the bride down the aisle. Another example of this is graduation ceremonies, which are thoroughly secular. You sit solemnly, you wait for everyone's name to be called so that everyone can be recognized for their achievements, not in like a participation trophy, you get a prize way, but in a real sense, everyone who has graduated, everyone who has made the mark is going to be called forth and recognized, and their name is going to be honored. And the principal or the dean or whoever runs the institution or college that they're attending is going to be giving them the diploma. They hand it off to them, and it's almost like being knighted in a sense. There's another good example. Knights have to stand before the queen, and she does the thing with the sword. I don't know what you call that, but there's a reason, right? And you could just as easily say, hey, I don't know, Sir Elton. That's a bad example. Lancelot, you're a knight now. Your knightly title is in the mail. Or you've graduated now. You've got your Bachelor's of Science. It's going to be in the mail. Thanks for the money. And you could do that, and it would be much more efficient. People wouldn't have to waste their time at graduation ceremonies. I know when I was in high school, I didn't want to go to my graduation ceremony because I thought it was a waste of time, because we are conditioned to see these sort of profound rituals. I don't know how profound you think graduation is, but we're conditioned to see rituals as wastes of time, as inefficiencies, as things that are not necessary. But I would argue that they're wholly necessary, especially when you rightly understand how the ritual involves all of the human body, all of the senses, and all of you're moving, you're walking about. So there's that, and that's applied to secular rituals. So this becomes an even more important point when you move on to religious rituals, because what are religious rituals? Well, obviously, when you're in a church, right, you're spiritually engaged with God, or that's the intention, I suppose. But when you're conducting these rituals, you're also engaged in a bodily way with the worship of God. And so you achieve this, I'll call it whole worship, where the two different natures of the human being are set to one accord, doing one thing towards the glorification of God. So, the best example I can think of, obviously, is the celebration of the Eucharist. But even in, and see, that's an interesting point, because Anglicans, for example, do not believe in the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist, but they still do communion. Why? You know, what is the point? And they'll say, well, it's a ceremony. Why? What is the point? That's the thing, right? If Christ is not real and present in the Eucharist, then it is inefficient to take communion, right? There are easier ways of achieving spiritual communion with Christ. But yet they still do it. Because I think, well, first off, I think Anglicans are more Catholic than they were more Catholic than they wanted to admit. But also, I think those early Anglicans, the ones that didn't believe in transubstantiation, they definitely saw the importance of the ceremony, even if they didn't attach any greater significance to it. They saw the importance of having this embodied experience of worship. And so I think, and you can take this even to Protestant denominations, where they still stand for the gospel reading. Why? You know, why do you stand? Well, out of honor and reverence. Why is standing a way to show honor and reverence? Well, it's less comfortable than sitting, obviously. And when you're sitting, you know, it's a passive thing. Whereas when you're standing, you're ready and you're engaged and you're actually doing something. You're standing there. So yeah. So forgive me. So just to recap, rituals, highly important, because if you understand correctly the nature of the human being, then rituals as the embodied manifestation of meaning are intensely important in transferring tradition from one generation to another. And a generation that fails to inculcate its children in performing these rituals will in some sense have failed to pass on their traditions. I guess that's all I have to say. This has been the Hidebound Convivium. Thank you for watching, and have a good day.